talking to him. The first conversation we had was around the startup he was doing. That eventually led him to the Bay Area, sold that. He went off to Microsoft for a few years, came back to the Bay Area and headed up YouTube's monetization and led YouTube for several years before he went back chasing after the entrepreneurial bug, and he's just about to launch yet another startup. He's an awesome guy, and join me in welcoming Shishir Mehrotra to the stage. Oh, yeah, I'm going to get chairs for you.
Perfect.
Yeah. See, I think he needs.
You want that one, right? Yeah. Yeah, you can come on up. Remind me which side you want.
I don't care. Hi.
You want that one, right? Yes.
Yeah.
All right, good evening.
Good evening.
I feel like I can't see half the room. I'm going to scoot forward. All right, I'm Shishir Mehrotra, and I have the pleasure tonight of hosting our Spotlight honoree, Megan Smith. And I'll give a few words of thank you. I'll give a few words of introduction, and then we'll get started. So, Megan and I got to know each other at Google. We worked together for a number of years. Turns out we were actually born in the same town. We were both born in Buffalo.
Yay!
Which is somebody here was born in Buffalo. Seems unlikely. And then after that, she went to MIT. She was course 2, and among a number of other things, she somehow drove a solar car 2,000 miles across Australia, which I want to hear more about at some point. She spent a few years at Apple and General Magic, and then spent about 9 years at Google, running the new business development group, the Google.org, and was part of the leadership team at Google X. And for those of you that don't quite understand what some of those terms mean, I can characterize her Google time in a couple ways. I think we can scoot back. So at Google, I think she was generally, you could characterize it in 2 ways. One, she was the voice and energy for stretching the Google vision. The new business development group was in charge of structuring partnerships and acquisitions that took Google to new places, and so those things like Maps and Earth or Picasa or so on. And then on the other side, I think most people who are at Google would characterize Megan as being the cultural icon for Google. And whether it was things like Google.org and how we worked with nonprofits and charities, or a super wide range of diversity inclusion initiatives, which I'm sure we'll hear more about in a minute. And sorry, I missed before Google, she was the CEO of a startup called Planet Out. And then in 2014, she got a call from President Obama to go and be the 3rd CTO of the United States, which for those of us that know her, for those of us that know her, that was no surprise at all. A very well-deserved appointment. And got a lot of interesting things done there. I had a chance to go visit DC, I guess it's been a year now, but and hear a little bit more from her team and see some of the different things they've been working on. And it's really amazing how much she was able to accomplish in that role. I think we're going to do a little Q&A here. Just one procedural thing. Who has the app for the conference? Okay, everybody look around. Does every table have at least one? Okay, so we're going to do the Q&A after this. You submit the questions in the app, and then they show up on the screen. So if you don't have the app, find somebody at your table who does, and they can do it that way. And if that doesn't work, well, Vivek's going to find some other way to do it otherwise. Yeah. All right, good. So everybody start thinking about questions. I'm going to try to ask questions across a little bit of a smattering of Megan's background. I think Megan's done so many things in so many different areas. I think we could take hours up here, but I'm going to try to give a little taste across different parts of it. And I thought I'd start with what I thought was a fun moment in the story. I'd love to hear about becoming CTO. Like, how did what did Obama call, and like what was the caller ID, and then what did you negotiate? Like, what was the back and forth and so on?
Yeah, it was amazing. So I was in Africa. We had opened the Google offices in Africa several years before that, and continued to work with the amazing entrepreneurial teams there. And so I was in Kampala and in Nairobi. And I got an email from the current CTO. And I wrote back saying, and he said, oh, I want to talk to you. And I just wrote back saying I'd be back, the following Monday. And when I got back, I wrote to him, and he wanted to talk urgently, and it was really quick. So I had never, like many people in this room, some people, Marcus here, who supported the PCAST team, you served many years, but many of us in this room maybe haven't served in our governments, either in the U.S. government, if you're from the U.S. or whatever country. But it had never occurred to me to go in a tour of duty like this. And so as Todd told me about this job, I thought, it's really interesting, but what? I would move to Washington, and I would do this. And as I got to know more and more about what the president was trying to do and what was needed and what the opportunity was, I became more and more interested in doing that. And we were able to figure out as a family. Our boys came and Kara commuted, and we made that work. And so 33 days later, the president called and offered me the job, which was incredible.
You said yes right away?
Yeah. Yeah, I said, yes, sir. Yes, sir, Mr. President. And Alex McGilvery came also at the same time, who some people may know, often called AMAC. He's one of the most incredible policy, legal and code leaders from the Valley. Had been the general counsel of Twitter for 6 years at that time, had worked with us at Google. And and so we went actually together. He was deputy CTO and really championed a lot of our pure policy work, as well as leadership in the team that we did together.
Yeah. So I thought one thing that might be helpful for this group, I know, for me at least, I know about government as like 3 branches, and that's sort of the end of the knowledge. And I know when I went out and saw you, that team started naming off all the different divisions and departments. Maybe you can give a little brief civics lesson on
Sure.
How government works.
Yeah, and, I was in a similar position when I went out there. I mean, you understand government from, the services that you're part of and sort of awareness from the news and other things. But until you're really sort of in the mix of it, it becomes very clear who's doing what. So when we first got there, we actually thought we would go talk to Congress a lot, but we actually didn't spend very much time with Congress. Congress is over debating legislative, that side. We're really the executive branch, which is running the government. And so it's a very operational job. And so in the president's team, the executive office of the president, think of it like a company like corporate. So this is this team, and then all the divisions, right? The Department of Energy, NASA, Department of Commerce, Education, and they're running agriculture. They're running those teams. The secretary is running that division, Secretary Kerry for State Department. And we're this sort of central team that's really helping the president coordinate that agenda of whatever it is that he or she wants to deliver with the American people, and helping also those agencies on the topic you have. So our group is the Office of Science, Technology, and Policy, where the President's Science Advisor sits, and Dr. John Holdren, also MIT, who served the President for 8 years, just extraordinary. Dr. Holdren accepted the Nobel Peace Prize for student pugwash. He's a nuclear disarmament expert. He's a climate change expert. You name the topic, he knows it. He was one of these administrators at Woods Hole, rock star person to work, and served all 8 years. And so the Office of Science, Technology, Policy is really running the conversation around science and tech policy, as well as science and technology as it applies to any policy. So that could be supporting the NASA conversations, all the way to what Dr. Holdren often called hand grenades, like when Ebola or a rocket blows up or something has happened, in that moment you need to respond that requires science and tech. And so we are embedded in that team, and so we're working very closely with all the other agencies, out into the government, with the private sector, with the state and local and other people. And it's really an amazing opportunity. It's a very broad position. The Chief Technology Officer, my job, and I was the third person in, is a new position that President Obama created. It's a peer to the science advisor. It's also like an assistant to the president, so it reports directly like the science advisor, but embedded at the Office of Science, Technology, Policy. Under President Obama, we had about 122 people and 125 in OSTP. And so there were divisions, actually, interestingly, very similar to Northern California Club. The club here is division, so an energy and environment division, science-centric, national security and international affairs, and then tech and innovation, NASA policy, Internet of Things, chips, that group, and then our team. And our team was really, how do you help the president and his team harness the power of data, innovation, and technology on behalf of the American people? Really a disruptor entrepreneur position to add into the government. And as they came off the campaign, there's people just slot into positions, and there wasn't a position for that kind of data science, techie, entrepreneur, Silicon Valley type. And that's how the idea of this position came up. And it's not that science and tech advising is new in any way. President Washington started the Army Corps of Engineers before our country was founded. And so we've always had whatever the then needed, tech would be. So Vannevar Bush of MIT, of course with FDR, started what became National Science Foundation, the Manhattan Project, so much of the technologies that were needed during World War II, or Jerry Wiesner, who helped Nicholas Negroponte create the Media Lab, who was the MIT president, was a science advisor for President Kennedy. Interestingly, Nicholas told me that Wiesner was in the West Wing. We were in the room in the office next door, the Eisenhower Executive Office building. Wiesner was in the West Wing. I really believe that's why we went to the moon, because they were so close, they were great friends, and that science and tech advising was so close to the president at that time. And so it's a really amazing opportunity to get to do these jobs, and I really encourage everybody, now that you've heard this, like I'm sending you that email that I got in Africa, like think about doing this at some point in your career as a tour service, whether it's coming through API on the data side with open data, or whether it's really going and serving state, local, federal, tribal, or the UN, and getting a chance to be part of government. It's an amazing experience.
Yeah. All right, we'll come back around to that for sure. I reached out to a few other folks we know in government, and I asked Matt Cutts what to ask you. Matt Cutts is still there working on the U.S. Digital Service, and he said just ask her a generic question. I'm sure she has a good answer. What's your favorite White House memory?
Wow. It's we used to call it dog years. Like every day, so many things happen you can't imagine, and it goes. There's a funny one of the vice president would sometimes come upstairs, and he was recording videos because they sent out video messages. This is just a fun one of him coming in and saying, I'm going to be out of a job soon. Can I know a little bit more of this tech and your team? But Vice President Biden is such an incredible leader, and one of the things he would always talk about is as you're working on these hard problems that really take a broad set of people. These are, we worked on incredible things at Google together and here in Silicon Valley. I feel like the things that government works on are harder. It's hard to make a car drive itself. It's hard to make YouTube. Those are amazing things to accomplish, but it's harder to solve rural child poverty. And you need everybody at the table together. And so what I liked about Vice President Biden was his always talking about how the American people are incredibly smart, and that you should never question people's motives. You should really debate them on the fact they're coming from a good place. They have whatever the reason they came to their conclusions on. And so I think it's from his many, many decades in Congress, not really getting at and attacking people's motives, but assuming their motives are somewhat good, but their conclusions might be wrong, in your opinion, and how do you debate them in that way? And I thought it was really great advice.
Yeah. I'm going to bounce around a little bit. Let's go back to MIT. So we have some new, has everyone accepted already, or they're just admitted? At least admitted.
Thinking, where are you guys?
We'll take your answers at the end of the evening. What advice would you have for our new admittees?
I got to talk to them for a little bit, very briefly earlier. I think you guys all know this. MIT is such an incredible place to get to be part of, and it's. I got to the commencement speech and I talked about mind and hands, mens et manus, but at core, right, and heart, because heart is the unwritten part of the service. I remember Paul Gray in our freshman, sort of freshman picnic, talking about service. in effort there's joy, is what one of my kids' teachers used to say. And MIT is like such the perfect example of that. I mean, it's so hard. It's such hard work, right? But it's so extraordinary, and all of you are extraordinary, and getting to be part of this community and the longevity of it. As I was preparing for a commencement, I was reading, I love history, and I brought a little bit of history stuff to show you guys. But I looked at our early history, and next time you're back on campus, if you're walking down the Infinite Corridor, right near the Course 2 buildings where that 270 display is, just bang right and look at the wall. There's a little thing from the MIT libraries. And it talks about the first 10 or 20 years of MIT. And one of the things that's really noticeable in that are some of the innovations that are true of all of us still. Like one of my favorite ones is that the university is founded in 1861, but it's not until 1865 that we start teaching classes. And the year that we taught classes, the faculty taught for free in the evening. So the idea of open courseware and edX is from the very first day, the very first year in the 1800s. That's who we are. We give knowledge and we share knowledge. The second thing that's there, yeah, it's awesome. And you learn that, and the community is like that. I remember working on, in 270, now 2007, there's a pre-project where we happened to be working on a bearing and some work for wheelchairs. And so I ended up talking to Phil Morrison about wheelchairs, which is amazing, the physics, extraordinary physics faculty member. But the kind of community and how we're open. And so the second piece that I saw in there was that there was a teacher. He came to visit, he had moved to Boston, a teacher of the deaf, and he went to a physics lecture in that time. And our labs were open. And so he was really excited about some ideas that he got, and he asked if he could work with Pickering in the original physics lab. And so it's in our labs that Alexander Graham Bell invented the phone, because we were open, right? And we welcomed anybody, which is extraordinary. And then I also saw that at one point Runkle, who was, I think, somehow mining or some faculty, he decided that everyone had to pack up and go on this summer trip. He and his wife, she was also a technical, they were out visiting mines and camping, and just this idea of being deep in this idea of applied science and really lab-based learning and hands-on learning. It's really extraordinary. So it's in the roots of that. And so for the students, if you do come, and we welcome you, you're going to join an extraordinary community that just has impacted this world at level every single decade along. We were just reading, we've been lifting women's history, Ellen Swallow Richards. Really the most fundamental of beginning to measure water quality. What became now all of the sewer treatment and water treatment. She was the first woman to graduate from MIT, and at the 50-year anniversary, she wrote a paper about how the applied sciences were equal to the learned sciences, which was a new idea of the industrial age at the time. Just extraordinary history that's there. So.
Yeah. Sounds like a great argument to accept. Let's move forward a little bit to Google. What are some of your? I have tons of great memories. What are some of yours?
There's so many. I think one time we were reviewing I guess it's sort of the serendipity of our founders, of Larry and Sergey. They're brilliant and extraordinary. Susan Wojcicki, who you worked with so closely, these fundamental leaders. Susan is so amazing because you'd be in a room and people would be arguing, and Susan was always triple booked. She'd be in 3 different meetings. She'd walk in, she's so calm. She has 5 children. She's run so much of the company. She'd sit down, and pretty soon, within minutes, everybody was looking at the screen and moving forward and getting things done. But when you asked me that, I just flashed on a meeting when we were making a decision about an acquisition. We were focused on something, and Sergey, all of a sudden, I don't know, he just switched the projector over to Keyhole, which is Google Earth, and said, I think we should buy this company. And and then we moved forward. I think that the openness to talent that we had, and I'd say if you look at Google's products, about half of them are homegrown, and about half of them come from finding incredible teams that were out in the world that we could convince to join us and be on that mission. And at the time, I remember head of engineering, was talking about, Wayne was talking about, he said, it is all the world's information, useful and accessible, but this is the actual world. And we were able to convince that team to come, and what an amazing thing to have that platform for the world, and thinking about, the Ushahidi platforms and all the things that have been built on top of Matt. It was such an honor to get to work with them. And I later got to be on the board as we were beginning. John Henke, who's one of the co-founders of Google Earth, saw his 15-year-old son sitting playing video games and was like, I got to get you off the couch. And so he came up with the company Niantic, which eventually came and created Pokemon Go. So just infinite creativity everywhere you could look.
Yeah.
Which was great.
Let's shift topics a little bit. So as long as I've known you, you've been a big champion of diversity and inclusion, and I know you brought a couple of pictures that you wanted to show as well on some of your latest thinking.
Yeah. So I wanted to bring you an image. There's a bunch of things about diversity, but I wanted to bring you guys an image because we were talking about the future of AI, and I know these guys can. Yeah. So just to get into some data, I just have. This is one data slide, and then I have a couple of photos. I came across this on the web. I got to know Gina Davis at one point, and she's an amazing actress. For younger people, she's the mom in Stuart Little. For older people, she's Thelma and Louise. She's awesome. So she did a lot of research as she was watching TV with her children, and she noticed the imbalance, in this case in gender, but it's also in race. Down here in the bottom corner, this is children's television, boys or men's lines to girls' lines. Boys and men's lines in blue, girls and women's lines in red. So when children are watching TV, they learn that men and boys speak and girls and women don't speak. It's really striking. This happens to be at Disney, but it's just any of the films. Like Frozen is 54% boys' lines. Milan is 74% boys' lines. And up in the upper, the larger picture there, this is men's to women's lines in 2,000 screenplays. So when we watch TV, when we watch movies, men are speaking and women are not speaking. It's really striking to see this visual. And I wanted to bring it to you guys because I think there's a huge opportunity right now for us as technical people to bring data science and artificial intelligence and machine learning and algorithms to some of these more intractable problems. And so some of the Presidential Innovation Fellows, which is one of the things that Todd Park actually, when he was CTO, created, and we accelerated they're like entrepreneurs in residence in government, a little bit like Kennedy creating the Peace Corps or Johnson creating the White House Fellows. President Obama created the Presidential Innovation Fellows. There's been more than 100 of them. They're entrepreneurs in residence, do extraordinary things. Two of them did, and I helped package up some data at the Department of Commerce around all of our incomes and set up a whole hack the pay gap. So we have this extreme pay gap between women and men, and very, very extreme for women of color who are paid. I think Hispanic women are 55 cents on the dollar to white men. And that's an intractable problem that just we rally and try to get ourselves to do things, but here's an opportunity to dive into the API and the data, and people came up with amazing apps and things. VR to help negotiate better, help managers be better. People created an e-commerce site where you would choose what gender and what race you were, and you would see the prices change just to raise your consciousness about that. You could look at your own pay gap and look at the data relative to your own personal situation. Try to get ourselves out of this. And so this is one around what's around us. It's not only the movies we watch, but it's the meeting we were in, it's the textbook we read, and so it's really affecting us. So just a couple quick images. How many people saw Imitation Game, amazing film? So one of my favorite memories in the White House was we were going to do the coding experience with the president, and he became coder-in-chief. I don't know if you guys remember the pictures of an 8th grader working with him. He told me secretly that he'd already done some coding with punch cards and Fortran when he was in high school. But as I walked into the Oval Office, because you get to pick them up and brief him as you walk, Prince William happened to leave the Oval. And so I wanted to show you the next image first, and I'll explain what that story is. But first off, one of the things that's extraordinary about Imitation Game and about the story it tells is about heroic engineering, which is what we all do. right? We work on heroic engineering and computer science. We use science and technology to make the world a better place, to reduce our impact on the planet. And these people who cracked the Enigma codes saved 11 million lives, is the estimate, and shortened the war by 2 years. One of the pieces of the story that I think is really important, in your mind for just a second, imagine those code breakers from World War II. Just think of them. Okay, you got them? Okay, I'm going to click this slide and I'm going to show you them. Did you imagine this? So amazing. These women are in their 90s, and what I said to the president, because Prince William had just left over, I said, Mr. President, you know, there's a connection between what you and I are about to do and Prince William. He said, what's that? And I said, had you seen this movie? He said, oh, yes. And I said, you know, the Duchess of Cambridge's great aunt and grandmother were code breakers at Bletchley Park. And so he said, he said, I didn't know that. And I said, in the movie, he said, I saw the movie. He said, 2/3 of the code breakers were women. He said, the movie doesn't show that. Right, that's a problem because we're losing our history. And so we need to know that it's been women and men together doing this extraordinary work. This next image, just 2 or 3 more quick images. This is an amazing picture. My friend was at Harvard when she saw this. This is the ENIAC. This is our incredible imitation game story from the University of Pennsylvania. MIT had the Whirlwind. And I'm looking, by the way, Jay Forrester and others are in that picture, and there's a woman in that picture. I'd like to know who she is. There's also a picture from Harvard Mark I, from also World War II, in the beginning of the invention of computers. And it's something, just quickly as an aside, sometimes certainly when you're in the White House, you have that experience, like I was saying, Dr. Holdren, talking about your agenda, what you plan to work on, and then what comes up. And sometimes what comes up makes you do much more extraordinary things. So in the case of World War II, what came up was we invented computers as humanity, right, between the UK and us and others. So sometimes that's the more important stuff to be working on. And so this is ENIAC, Eckert and Mockley, extraordinary in the middle, the creators of, they're inside the computer. My friend noticed the women in the picture, and she asked who they were. And people said they were refrigerator ladies. They're modeling, right? And she looked and she's like, I don't think they're modeling. And she asked the University of Pennsylvania, because they were in a reunion, were the women coming? And they said, what women? So these are 2 of the first digital programmers in America. And it's a nearly lost 70-year-old story, but they wrote the first sort routines, came up with the first idea of computer science and software for this, for our country in this way. And luckily, Kathy interviewed them in 1998, 6 of them before they died, and we have this story. So it's like the Hidden Figure story, and hopefully we'll have A League of Their Own Meets Computer Science as a film soon. This one's also important, and this is MIT grad Joanna Hoffman in the top left there. She's a physics grad. She's from Eastern Europe. This is the original Macintosh team. And as portrayed by the Rolling Stones photographs, the historic record, Steve's team. There's 4 women and 7 men in the pyramid. Joanna Hoffman, of course, was the product manager, product marketing, and down in the bottom here in the corner, Susan Kerr. Every graphic you've ever seen really has heritage to Susan, the Chicago font, and all the graphics of the Mac. She worked very closely with Bill Atkinson. He was the back end, she was the front end. All of the men in these pictures are in the movies with speaking roles about Steve Jobs during the Mac scenes. And all of the women in these pictures are not in the cast. With one exception, Joanna is played by Kate Winslet. She won the Golden Globe for playing Joanna in the most recent Jobs film. But even then, there's a twist. Joanna came out of the movie, again, I said physics grad from MIT, Eastern Europe. And her son said, Mom, did you really iron Steve Jobs' shirt? He knows his mom. She said, no, Jeremy, I've never ironed a shirt in my life except once for you when we were late. So how do we help Hollywood get ourselves out of the biases that we inherited so we don't diminish our talent accidentally in media? So these are really important pieces, and we're making progress. Katherine Johnson, won the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I hope you see the movie Hidden Figures. It's an extraordinary story. It's a true story. these young women are just the upcoming Mark Zuckerberg kids, right? They are 13. Olivia made this amazing game. Kimura made the device up above, this app that listens to the room watching for domestic violence. And it brings up resources if it hears something that shouldn't be going on, including call the police as a button. And so sometimes I think the way to diversify tech is to techify everything else. And so, as we get in and think about AI and machine learning, I wanted to bring some of these images to you guys so that we start remembering that we have this extraordinary bias we live with, and we're not going to be able to get out of it unless we kind of start thinking through using computer science and tech and the stuff around us to listen to the room and help ourselves debug these challenges that none of us created, but we certainly inherit them. So those are a couple images I wanted to share.
That's great. Having known Megan for a number of years, it's not at all surprising she found a very creative and impactful way to show an important point. That's very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what to follow that with. Maybe we come back a little bit to your time as CTO, and you could tell a little bit about, you accomplished lots of things. You sent me some great write-ups of some of the different things. Maybe you could pick an initiative you feel particularly proud of in your time as CTO.
Yeah, I think we got to work on so many different things, and again, just a reminder that we're kind of like corporate, so we're working together with so many different people, working with the agencies, we're working out into the country, around the world. Might think about, we worked in 3 different areas, the big buckets. One of them was policy, and I used to call it TQ, like IQ and EQ, adding a tech person. So imagine a table with a lawyer, an economist, a scientist, an operator, all these different people who are collaborating together like a faculty of a university trying to figure out policy. A lot of times they had left the tech person out. And so that kind of, we called it TQ, like tech IQ, EQ, TQ in the room. If that person's not there, it doesn't mean that the other people will bring what they will bring, but if you leave that out and you consider it implementation, you get the architecture wrong in terms of tech. So that's how healthcare.gov happened. There just wasn't that tech person at that table, and very other extraordinary talented people were there, but without that other person, you just aren't thinking in the right, you aren't procuring in the right way. And so one of the things we did was we created the President's Chief of Staff helped us create a tech policy task force that allowed us to have a technical conversation with all of the computer science and tech folks across the Executive Office of the President. And so whether the Domestic Policy Council or National Economic Council or National Security Council were dealing with whatever topic, this tech policy task force could be a teammate with them. And so whether it was encryption, and we could have a technical conversation about encryption and a policy conversation about encryption, and they could inform each other and people could go back and forth in rooms, or whether it was open source. So if we had had the open source conversation only run through the Office of Management and Budget, there would have been a great table with one technical person there who would have been trying to defend open source, and everybody else might not have been as familiar, and so they'd be like, well, is this a safety risk, security risk? This seems, and they might not have understood that. But by having a tech team set the policy and convince this group, you could move much faster. So it's more of a process point, but it was really helpful to get a lot more technical folks into the room on those conversations. So I'm really proud of getting open source into the government, getting the AI conversations, getting net neutrality. All of those things we were able to do at a much higher technical capability level because the president had helped us recruit that level of talent and given us a door to be in the room instead of implementation. The second bucket is really modernizing the government, capacity building the government, and the third one was capacity building the American people. In capacity building the government, we brought, with the great help of Todd Park and Jennifer Anastasioff and the president himself, recruiting over 400 Americans into government who used to make Amazon and Facebook and Google and Twitter and Dropbox and all the stuff we make. And so that group has a position, whether it's in the United States Digital Service, which is a bit like Navy SEALs sort of out in the agencies in tech, solving really high priority stuff, doing design sprints and fixing, healthcare for the VA or immigration. Crazy things we would come across in these sprints, like people didn't have a content management system in immigration, and so as people were applying they were literally shipping physical boxes around to different groups to adjudicate the documents rather than having a content management system that was proper. $300 million of shipping, which is the budget of the Peace Corps. So how do you kind of upgrade how we're doing things and buy that well? So that was really important, and the theory of change there was bringing people. So a great amount of work that was done. And then the third area, capacity building the American people, we were able to start things like computer science for all. Now there's Arkansas, Rhode Island, Hawaii, all these states, cities, Oakland, San Francisco, New York City, et cetera, Chicago, now bring computer science. 9 out of 10 parents want computer science taught at school. And so getting that to be a real thing and a movement across our country, which is really getting done, in the funding from NSF to get the right classes. Tech Hire is another one that we got done. Tech Hire is not necessarily a big government program, but we have 600,000 jobs open in the United States, and they pay 50% more than the average American salary, but so many people are not opting into them. Why? What can we do about that? So what we would do, we called the Scout and Scale. We would look around the country, and we'd see who had already solved it. We found St. Louis was doing code boot camps because the Square team was doing that work. Louisville had a thing called Code Louisville. Their workforce development people were pulling people into tech. In Delaware, the companies were jamming the community colleges to help them to get more people through the short course, months, not years. As many people as they could hire from 2-year and 4-year degrees, but also getting these people from boot camps. And now, by workshopping that small group, almost like think of them like the seed round of an IPO, we would find cities who'd love to copy them if they knew it exists. Think of that like Series A. You would start to have a thing, you could announce it with the president. So we had 21 cities start to drive that ecosystem of workforce development, short course boot camps, and employers willing to hire. That's now over 70 cities. We were just in eastern Kentucky with 35 coal miners graduating from Code Boot Camp, with the congressman from the South Bay, congressman from eastern Kentucky, the governor trying to drive that as a new way in Appalachia for people to move out of coal industry jobs and into coding jobs. That's really happening now. And there's another 100 cities that want to join that. So you were able to kind of accelerate things that were working. It's really exciting. And maybe the last one that I really love as an example of that was a colleague who was a public defender in Miami, Lynn Overman, kept going at justice and working on justice. And we found solutions in the country, 2 different kinds of solutions. One, Dallas and Los Angeles were opening data for public transparent data. Think of how you got here using your phone and mapping app. So what if you had open data, not just US Geological Survey or weather data, but the president opened over 200,000 data sets. So we're able to do things with Census and others to really start to have apps like Housing and Urban Development now has Redfin and Zillow and Airbnb writing apps for and expanding their features for 100% of Americans, not just wealthy Americans. Really cool stuff going on there. So what could we do around justice? And so we found that Dallas and LA were opening data, officer-involved shooting, use of force data, all kinds of data sets. And then also our colleagues found that Miami and others were doing really interesting enterprise data work in the city. Miami, for example, had gone from 7,000 people in prison to 4,900 and closed a jail. They just closed another jail. And the way that they did that was they opened a simple 12-bed stabilization unit in the hospital, and they taught 911 and police that in addition to taking people to jail or to the ER if they're facing mental health or substance abuse issues, to bring them to this place. And all of a sudden, 50,000 inbound calls across 4 years turned into only 109 arrests, and people started getting better. And so they were able to really treat mental health and substance abuse in the way it needs to be treated, not by jail, and really transform. It was fabulous. So our MIT kind of scaling way or our tech way, the way we would do that in Silicon Valley is we'd want to rapidly share that. And so we were able to find other cities that would wanted to know that. And now we have over 140 jurisdictions who talk to each other every 2 weeks, sharing these kinds of innovations. Camden, 205 people cost 70% of the money there in criminal justice. And they now are looking at the data that's who's hitting our ER, our justice system, our homeless system. They found there was 205 people, and they could treat them better. So for 20% of the money, they're solving these problems in Camden, New Jersey. So now those people are rapidly in a rapid sharing thing. So we're trying to use that same thing that we all use, kind of our South by Southwest ways of open source, open innovation, rapid sharing of solutions with people who haven't had that technique but are extraordinary at what they do, and we've been able to accelerate things in that way.
Awesome. I had a couple more questions, but we can, if you want to put the question list up, we'll turn to that in a second. And so if you have someone around with a phone, you can add questions through that, or upvote or downvote questions to make sure we're answering the ones people are most interested in. But I won't read yet. Actually, the third one is pretty close to my next question. Was you set up a lot of things in the last few years, and your predecessors before you. It's a new administration now. What happens to all that? Does it stay? Does it go? And then maybe a sort of similar question is, what do you think with the new administration we should be paying attention to?
A couple things. One of the things that was really clear, we had a little bit of a struggle during what's great in the country is that we have 3 months for transition. So the election happens in 2.5 or so months of transition. Given the way the election happened, people were not as ready as they needed to be, and so we really didn't see the transition teams until really late into January. We saw a couple people right before the winter holidays. And so we weren't able to transition as much as, say, other administrations had. And also this particular team went and made a lot of plans prior to talking to many people. So it was just what it was. Now, once they came up to speed, people were pretty happy with what had happened and felt it was pretty bipartisan. So on the tech side of this, like the digital stuff I was talking about, the Presidential Innovation Fellows, which President Obama signed into law right before he went out on Inauguration Day, right before he went out onto the stage. And that bill went through Congress. I forget what they call it. It's like hot something. It goes through Congress when there's no argument. So the Presidential Innovation Fellows are now in law. The CTO is now in law. They have a deputy CTO in place and are looking for a CTO. So the U.S. Digital Service is happening. Those are there. People are doing that work, and many of those particular teams were not set up as political appointees, but they were as term appointees. That said, it's interesting to see the Office of Science and Technology Policy. I think President Obama, Dr. Holdren said, he really felt was the most fast-forward science and tech president we've had since Jefferson. I mean, the amount of volume of things, and Mark, you can probably attest to this also, of the presidential advisors on science and technology, just the breadth of work that was accomplished was extraordinary. And we got to do some of it, but we also witnessed all of our colleagues and the volume and the talent level. Much of that persists, right? Many things were started and continue. At the same time, the cuts to science and technology are, I think, a grave mistake, and I hope that we can work together to kind of get on the phone and really push these guys. It may be an unawareness, and if it is, we need to push hard because it really, you guys all know this as science and technical people, not continuing to fund basic research, not funding these key things really is, cuts us off. A friend of mine does a really sort of fun thing called pizza economics. And so she's sewing slices of pizza and like what's being cut and how to think about it. And when I think about cutting the science and technology, it's like they're selling the oven, the pizza oven. Like, don't do that. We need to eat, for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and we need the science and technology base that this country has always had, that almost all of our leaders have driven for. Now that said, OSTP, this office we were in, was 125 people under President Obama. It was 70 people under George Bush. So it goes up and down. President Nixon canceled it at one point. So that happens and we survive it. But he didn't like one of the things that they advised on, and so he cut the office, and it was reinstated later. But so it's very dangerous to cut the science and tech budgets, and it's not good for the future of our economy. And so I'm hopeful that we all can work together to really raise the awareness. Back to my point about Biden, let's not think about their motives. Let's think about how we disagree with their arguments, and try to convince them to get this moving, because it's really important for our country that we continue to really drive hard. Especially, one of the last reports you guys were working on was around semiconductor industry, and that's at the heart of Silicon Valley, making sure we continue to maintain our extraordinary capabilities around chips and hardware design as much as it's software design. It's really important stuff.
I see yeah, thank you. As always, a super optimistic answer. It was very good. My last question is actually on the list already, so I'll wait till we get to it. It seems like the top one was coming back a little bit to diversity. How do you think, what can we actually do to increase women in CS roles?
Yeah, and Susan Wojcicki just had an article in Vanity Fair about this. Yeah. My observation, having worked on this for a long time, is that we don't have the priorities set high enough. So I think everybody's got diversity as a high priority, but it's in the top 20. And if we really want to move the needle, especially because so much of it, like I was showing you, nobody knew about the graphic there that I just showed. Like, it's just so unconscious, and it's so deep-seated in us that we're going to have to set it into the top 3 or 5 of every company. And so it's hard. I remember when we were at Google, that meeting moves all the time. The diversity meeting moves, and the shipping the product meeting doesn't move. We're going to have to treat it that way. And it's been so exciting to watch Brian at Intel, Stuart in the Slack team, Satya at Microsoft, actually starting to do that, like moving the diversity priority much higher. The Intel team actually has said they feel that it's one of the greatest things they can do around shareholder value, is to really sort of field the whole American team into their company, the whole world team. And all the research shows the more diverse your team is, the better the products. It's a prosperity agenda. And so you actually can be working on deep shareholder value. It's aligned with the social mission of including everyone. It just is more uncomfortable because we're not used to that. There's a wonderful woman named Laura Liswood who wrote a book called The Loudest Duck. And she said, one of the ways you can think a little bit about this, she talks about style compliance. And we have, a lot of times in Silicon Valley, one of our cultures is intellectual combat. And not everyone wants to do intellectual combat. So how do we change our rooms and the rooms that we're in and make them more comfortable for everybody in a way that would get the best out of everybody? And one of the things Laura teaches is whatever grandma and grandpa told you is what you think. So for example, maybe grandma and grandpa said, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Or maybe you were in Japan where I lived and I remember this expression, grandma and grandpa said, the nail that stands up will be hammered down. Or maybe you were in China and grandma and grandpa had an expression, the loudest duck will be shot. Or maybe you're a woman on the planet, and when you were a girl, grandma and grandpa always said, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't speak. Okay, so you walk in a room, you got a wheel, a nail, a duck, and a nice. The wheel's talking, what do you do? So you think about that environment, right? I love that she abstracts it from gender and race into this other way of thinking. That's what's going on in our rooms, and we're hearing some of us, and we're not hearing other of us. Some of us are completely missing from the room. And so what can we do to kind of change it up and set the priority much higher? If you ever get a chance, you guys are nearby, who's ever been to the Bay Model? Yeah, it's so cool, right? Yeah. So if you go across the Golden Gate Bridge, go to the Sausalito, the harbor there, and look for the Bay Model, the Army Corps of Engineers, somebody had a crazy idea to dam up the bay. And so luckily the Army Corps of Engineers built a working model of San Francisco Bay, and it's bigger than this room. And every 14 minutes the water flows in and out, and it's beautiful. And right there is this model, but tucked away in the corner is the Marin Shipyard Museum from World War II. Think Rosie the Riveter. So after Pearl Harbor, we had to rebuild the Pacific Fleet, and we did that in most of the West Coast ports, and certainly in the Bay Area, we were one of the big contributors. And so Bechtel and our top engineering companies came in as the leadership brass, but then we signed up everybody. You know, we opened like 33 daycare centers in 3 months because we had to put women to work. We can do this stuff when we want to. And what's so cool is to look at the photos of who rebuilt the Pacific Fleet, because it's the whole country. It's totally interracial, it's gender balanced with the kind of this, we call it the Sci-Tech Jedis in Arizona, so the leadership of tech that did it, but everybody else learned and brought their tools and went for it. And they built 7 bays of ships, and one of the ships they built in 33 days, a huge naval ship. So really everyone can always do everything. We just need to understand the true history. We need to understand how to include people, and we have to change the culture of the environments that we're in to get this stuff moving. And we need to do it with much more urgency, especially with the competitive threats that we face and the opportunity that we have with so much talent around.
That's good.
Yeah.
We're at the AI conference, and people want to hear about AI. What threats do we face?
Yeah.
I had it on my list. I'd love to hear, you were telling me a little bit earlier about some of the process view of AI regulation from the government side.
Yeah, so one of the concerns that you have, one of the fundamental challenges we have in the country is that we have this weird stereotype that there's technical people and there's not technical people. Right, and that plays out every day. It's playing out with the Congress folks because a lot of the people in Congress are incredibly competent and talented, but not technical. Same thing with people in government. And so we've got to stop that stereotype, because in the 21st century, we need everybody to be fluent in not only critical thinking and arts and letters, but also computational thinking and mathematics and design thinking. And really feel comfortable with all of the tools of the universe, or at least grab people from those other teams and, 2 in a box or 3 in a box. So the AI conversation sits with that kind of thinking. The President felt really strongly there was a lot of conversation in this community, other communities, about concerns about AI, and he wanted to get us upgraded as a government in our thinking. And so rather than have people suddenly step into a very nascent field and start trying to regulate something, that doesn't make any sense, because you would make a lot of mistakes. The thought was to do a series of conversations and try to get the government up to speed on this and start to think about and really crowdsource. And so 2 of the people on my team, Ed Felton and Tara Lyons, led a series of almost like town hall, think Anderson Cooper, town hall conversations. And so it was with our incredible universities. So at University of Washington, there was a conversation on AI and law and policy. Here at Stanford, during the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, there was a conversation around startups, around sort of longevity and governance. There's the 100-year AI project at Stanford that they've started, and some of the tech possibilities. There was a conversation at Carnegie Mellon about safety and control in AI. There was a conversation at NYU with the Council of Economic Advisors around the economic impact of AI. And one of the findings there, which is this broad opening, like think about there's always more talent out of the room than in the room, right? So the more you can open up this conversation and really hear from a lot of different people, the better off we're going to be and the more prepared we're going to be. And so, certainly in the economic area, there's amazing things. You guys, many people have seen some of this. Downward pressure on 82% of the jobs that are $20 and less, paid $20 per hour and less. So we just have to really get ready for the economic transition that we're going to go through, truck driving, other kinds of jobs, how we're going to include all Americans, do what the folks are doing in Eastern Kentucky with Coal to Code, Mississippi Delta, entrepreneurship, makers, all of that work. And then there was also a conversation in DC about AI for good. That specific one, if you guys haven't seen it, the World Bank did a report called Digital Dividends. And it's about how if you, again, techify or get tech involved in the topics that you're always doing tech things with NASA and National Institute of Health, but not always with Department of Labor or HUD or others. And so how do you get them to be, why don't we do AI and machine learning and digital things with those groups? So it was really not a specific, hey, this is a solution, because none of us have that, but opening up the government to really have conversations on all the key topics, an open call on the web and a conversation on the web, and then we published the Future of AI report together with the Frontiers Conference, which I encourage people to take a look at, talking about all of these different topics and where the focus and discussion, a big recommendation for funding in AI, which again, back to the science push, we really have to push this administration to fund science, including AI. So it's good work.
You walk right into the next question. So you're clearly concerned about the lack of science in the current Trump administration. Anything that you'd recommend people here do about it?
I think, getting into those, going into government and serving in those jobs, really essential. And just getting on the phone to Congress folks and to the administration, to others, and just really pushing people. If you have friends who are in government, sitting down with them and talking through why this is important, and making the argument so people can see this. Some of these folks haven't been exposed to this world, and so we need to go make sure that they are aware the direct impact this has on the economy and on jobs and on our future, and solving key problems. Everything from the cancer moonshot to STEM education and moving, doing a lot of the work we're doing to move to active STEM, making sure kids have hands-on experiences in school and not just sitting kind of bored reading, but really doing science and math, that whole breadth of what it takes to be, a modern. I was really pleased to see some of the NASA funding come through, but we want to keep pushing on everything across the board.
Yeah. This next one's a good one. What's next for you? And actually, you decided to stay in D.C.
Yep.
And I wonder if you could comment both on what you're doing next and why you decided to stay in D.C.
Yeah, we call it the Digital 44. So all the digital tech folks who came into government, serving the country, as well as some of the campaign teams, are some of them are still in government, but some of them are at large. And we got the incredible opportunity to get exposed to some of these kinds of problems and see how we could apply our skill sets together, at that policy table. And so I just want to continue to work on some of this work. Really doing a lot of projects, both the work that we continue to do with Tech Hire, and some of our colleagues, like the justice work I was talking about, that's spun out now into the Arnold Foundation, is now driving a lot of that across all the different jurisdictions, that state and local work on that. So we're continuing to work with that and working on this pieces. I haven't structured it yet, but
yeah.
Lots of projects.
And why D.C.? You had an interesting perspective on being in the place where all
yeah,
people
I told actually in the commencement speech, I was talking to the students about the graduates. I told them that I felt like it was really important for us as tech folks to do two different things and flow between them. One is to do exactly like you guys are doing right now, be in places like Silicon Valley, like MIT, where there's tons of us, and we just advance the field, right? And it's awesome, and it's full of wonder and people driving for solutions and inventions and of all the things that you're passionate about. I don't know how many people in this room ever got to take acoustics from Professor Bose. Anybody? Yes. So, and he always talked about, if you do things that you're passionate about, you can just really change the world. And so, we got to do that stuff. And then the second part is go where you're really rare. And that's what we found in government. We were more rare. Of course, there's amazing technical people in government. There always have been, who are in DARPA and in NIH and in the IT teams, but not generally. And so go where you're rare, and you'll learn extraordinary things from colleagues who just know these whole other sectors that you would have never even thought about how that worked. And it'll make you think differently. And also you can bring these skills to that. And I really encourage everybody to take a tour of duty in some form at some point. And I just want to continue on this stuff because we've got a lot of stuff to fix together.
I'll take a couple more from the wall, and then I have one last one. That one's, it's phrased a little aggressively, but what would you recommend to your successor? It sounds like it's pretty close to the next one, which is would you accept if you were the successor?
Yeah, they tend to, in the government, if you'll just notice, there's sort of the political layer, which is small actually. Most of the people who serve in the federal government are career folks who are awesome. We got to work with so many extraordinary people. And so they are still there, the military, all the different people who serve in the federal government are there. There's a thin layer also of these kind of tour of duty. So the NSF head, I think, is 7 years or 5 years. So they overlap administrations. And then the thin layer of the politicals, so usually the politicals rotate. So that's, we rotate out. But yeah, I would serve again because I think that these are important jobs for us to do, and they have really high leverage. I think that I'm hopeful that they'll choose an entrepreneurial technical CTO. At first, they were thinking of not doing that.
Have they asked for advice?
They've asked a little bit, and so I hope they'll do that. They are definitely paying attention to tech and innovation as a threat, so I'm hopeful there. They're not moving as fast as I would, but I hope they'll get moving on that. Let's see, what advice? I just think one of the things Todd said to me is, and it's the same thing I would say to you guys about when you're in a rare space, bring yourself, don't adapt to that culture. So we have to bring our entrepreneurial selves because that's what's needed. And so that's that same thing, that whoever's in those roles, they just have to keep catalyzing, which is what the CTO job really teams up and you catalyze with people.
Maybe we'll take one last one from there, and I have one. Is Obama funny?
Yes. He's incredible.
Funnier than Jeff? Or?
He's pretty funny. He probably teases a little more.
Yeah, I think Jeff was pretty good. My last one, you gave me an analogy when we chatted about how in a lot of professions there's a sort of built-in way of rotating through government, that lawyers go and clerk and all the finance people seem to go through the Treasury Department and so on. So I was wondering if just to close this, maybe you could give us some really practical examples of maybe on one side, if there's someone here who's ready to really devote themselves to service, what you would recommend them doing. Maybe on the other side, someone who doesn't want to move to DC or so on. What are some practical ways for them to really participate?
Sure, there's a lot of ways to do things. Jen Palka, who was deputy CTO under Todd, prior to that had created Code for America, which is a wonderful organization that's headquartered here in San Francisco. And I recommend it just for everybody, just go visit them at some point, even just to know what they're doing. And they have brigades. They started with, I think, 5 cities, but they do a lot. What's so exciting now with open source is that, some of the technology that's written, of course, it can be shared across 50 states. It can be shared across all these cities. There's a lot of opportunity, both at a free layer and then at a freemium or civic tech, which is really emerging. So I encourage you to kind of think about state and local or tribal. And then on the federal level, there's everything from the Presidential Innovation Fellows, which are actually at all levels. It's not only people who you might think like Peace Corps volunteers, but very senior people who have, serial entrepreneurs come into that. So that's a 1-year tour, and you're more like entrepreneur residents, and you both kind of match with some agency. Blue Button from HHS came out of them. Lots of great projects. There's United States Digital Service is a little bit like, think of them like Navy SEALs. They're sort of out in small burst teams. They have a headquarters in the Office of Management and Budget, and then they're out. I'll give you an example of that. Lisa Golobter, who was she was the head of digital for BET, was on the Hulu team, helped write Flash. So she runs the Department of Education Digital Service team. And they've been doing things like packaging up APIs around student loans and making products like the college scorecard. And so all of a sudden students can know, what does a university cost? What's this university I'm looking at cost? What's the graduation rate? And what kind of salary do people make when they graduate, so that they don't get caught into some of these for-profit or other kinds of university situations which are not going to help them pay back their student loans. So really cool data sets that you can release. And do so that's U.S. Digital Service, amazing work they're doing on immigration and veteran health care and other things. The 18F team is, so in our government, the General Services Administration is kind of the central group that covers things like a lot of our buildings and central services. There's a tech transformation team there. They're run by Rob Cook, who's from Pixar, used to work for Steve Jobs. And so there's about 200 folks in that team, and they're actually distributed. So there's a team just near City Hall up in San Francisco in the 18F. They're in Chicago, they're in Boston, they're in Texas, as well as DC. So that's a great team there. And then, DARPA and National Science Foundation, just everywhere you look, there's folks in there. And then MIT leaders have served. David Newman just finished as the number 2 at NASA. Let's see, Ernie Moniz was just the Secretary of Energy. So there's all across the board a need for technical and scientific folks in government. And really taking that time out to do that, you'll learn a lot. And it'll stretch you in ways that you probably can't even imagine. And it's like the Bletchley Park and the ENIAC example. Sometimes it's the unexpected ones, both difficult ones like the Ebola crisis, as well as serendipitous ones like presidents going to a particular place or vice president, and you have a chance to put them into a place. Like, for example, vice president was going to St. Louis, and so we were able to get him into a tech training program that's a code boot camp north of Del Mar towards Ferguson that's run by the NAACP for 16 to 22-year-old youth who are all learning coding. So it's a code boot camp space, and he could stand that up, so that range of work. So there's really a broad set of things. The last one I'll leave you with is also within our companies and within, just from APIs and all the open data, you can do a lot. For example, if you work on the back end of connectivity for your company, say, most of the teams that work on connectivity don't have engineering and deal people like you. And so if you go help on broadband in the government, you can actually make us move much faster if you kind of go in as a presidential innovation fellow or somebody in that form and make an extraordinary difference.
I was going to mention when I came to visit, ended up running with a bunch of people. You had a hackathon going on while I was there, and there's actually a woman there who had worked with me at one of my past jobs. It was interesting just seeing, she was there just for a week, and she ended up solving some problem with how adoption agencies work and how kids get matched, and it was interesting to see people able to do it in just a week of time.
Yeah, we started these ideas in these quick sprints that we did, which
very impactful.
Which really work.
So I think everybody's ready for drinks and poker and so on. I wanted to thank you for taking the time. I wanted to thank you for all your past service and all your future service as well. Thank you. That's good. That's really good.
Thanks, guys.
You tell us where to go next? Yeah, very good.
How about another big hand for Megan and Shashir? Great.